The afternoon sky was calm and painted in soft shades of blue when the small passenger plane waited at the gate. The airport was busy, with people rushing to their flights, but inside the boarding area for Flight 237, there was a quieter feeling. Families held their tickets, business travelers checked their watches, and children leaned against their parents, excited or nervous about flying. Among all of them sat a little girl named Emma. She was only 8 years old, traveling with her mother. Emma was different from most children on the flight. While others played with tablets or ate snacks, Emma sat with a small notebook in her lap. She loved to draw. On the first page was a sketch of clouds with wide wings around them, almost like a picture of the sky itself. Her mother leaned close and said softly, "Are you ready, sweetheart?" Emma nodded. "Yes, Mama. I want to see the clouds from up close." Her mother smiled. Flying always made her nervous, but she tried to stay calm for her daughter. Emma, on the other hand, was curious. She had never been afraid of planes. Her grandfather, who had once worked at a small airport, had told her stories about flying machines. He used to say, "Planes are like birds. If you respect them, they carry you safely. If you fear them, you forget how beautiful they are." Those words stayed with Emma, and even now she whispered them quietly to herself. The boarding announcement was made, and the line of passengers slowly moved toward the plane. The flight attendants greeted everyone with practiced smiles. The pilot himself stood by the entrance of the aircraft, welcoming each person who stepped on board. His uniform was neat, his voice steady, and his smile comforting. "Good afternoon," he said to Emma and her mother. "Welcome aboard! It's a perfect day for flying." Emma looked up at him with big, curious eyes. "Are we really going to touch the clouds?" she asked innocently. The pilot chuckled. "We won't exactly touch them, but we'll fly right through them. You'll see them very close." Emma grinned, holding her notebook tighter. Her mother apologized quietly, but the pilot waved it off. He liked when children were excited. It reminded him why he loved his job. Inside the cabin, people settled into their seats. Businessmen pulled out laptops, families arranged bags, and children fussed over window seats. Emma was lucky. Her mother had chosen a window seat for her. She pressed her face to the glass, waiting for the moment they would rise into the air. The engines hummed, a steady vibration that made the floor tremble slightly. Some passengers leaned back nervously, but Emma sat straight, eyes wide, as if every sound was a new piece of music. Her mother touched her hand, giving a gentle squeeze. "Stay close to me, okay?" Emma nodded, but kept staring out. She didn't want to miss a second. The flight attendant gave the safety instructions. Some passengers listened carefully, others ignored it. Emma followed every word with surprising seriousness. She watched as the attendant showed how to buckle the seatbelt, how to wear the mask, and how to find the exits. Emma even whispered, "I'll remember," as if she was promising to be a responsible passenger. Soon the plane taxied onto the runway. The engines roared louder now, a deep, steady sound that filled the cabin. A hush fell over the passengers as they braced for takeoff. Emma's heart raced, but not with fear, only with excitement. She had always imagined this moment, and now it was finally here. The plane sped forward, faster and faster, until the ground blurred beneath them. With a sudden but smooth lift, the nose of the plane pointed upward, and they began to climb. Emma gasped, pressing her hand against the window. The buildings below shrank. The cars looked like toys, and the horizon stretched far and wide. Her mother smiled weakly. "See?" "We're flying," Emma whispered. "It feels like magic." The plane climbed higher. The sky outside shifted from pale blue to a brighter, endless shade. Soon the first clouds appeared, white, soft, and thick, floating like giant cotton hills. Emma's eyes sparkled. She opened her notebook and began to draw quickly, sketching the round shapes of the clouds, adding wings around them, trying to capture what her heart was feeling. The passengers around her noticed. A man across the aisle leaned over and smiled. "That's a beautiful drawing," he said kindly. Emma blushed and looked down, but her mother answered politely, "She loves drawing skies." The man nodded. "That's a good dream. Skies always remind us how small we are, but also how free we can be." Emma thought about his words as she continued to draw. The steady hum of the engines, the softness of the clouds, the way sunlight reflected off the wing, it all felt peaceful. She didn't know that soon this peace would be tested in a way no one on board could imagine. For now, though, the flight felt perfect. The captain spoke over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have reached an altitude of 15,000 feet. The weather is clear, and we expect a smooth journey. Please sit back, relax, and enjoy the view." Passengers sighed with relief. Some closed their eyes to rest. Others ordered drinks or started reading books. Emma didn't move her gaze from the window. She whispered to herself, "Hello, sky. I've been waiting to meet you." Her mother watched her daughter's glowing face and felt both proud and thankful. She didn't know what the flight would bring, but she was grateful that Emma could find beauty where others only found routine. And so the journey began, peaceful, calm, and filled with wonder. None of the passengers, not even the confident pilot or the curious little girl, could guess how quickly everything was about to change. The flight was calm for the first hour. The engines hummed steadily, and the sunlight streamed through the windows. Passengers settled into their routines. Some chatted quietly, others closed their eyes to rest, and a few watched the moving clouds with soft smiles. Emma still sat by the window, her little notebook open on her lap. She had already filled 3 pages with sketches of the sky. Her mother leaned her head back, trying to relax. Everything seemed normal. But then, a small tremor shook the cabin. At first, it felt like ordinary turbulence. A few passengers looked up, but most stayed calm. Planes often shook a little in the sky. The captain's voice came on the speaker, reassuring everyone. "Ladies and gentlemen, we may experience a bit of turbulence. Please keep your seatbelts fastened. Nothing to worry about." His voice was confident, but inside the cockpit things were not simple. The captain and his co-pilot exchanged concerned looks. The control yoke felt stiff. When the captain tried to adjust the plane's level, the plane did not respond smoothly. Instead, it tilted harder to one side. Warning lights flickered across. "The instrument panel. Hydraulic pressure is dropping," the co-pilot muttered, checking the gauges. The captain pressed several switches, his jaw tightening. "Stabilizers aren't responding. Try auxiliary controls." The co-pilot obeyed, flipping switches quickly. For a moment, the plane steadied. But then another shudder ran through the aircraft, stronger this time. A gasping sound came from the cabin as passengers gripped their seats. Drinks spilled. A baby began to cry softly. Emma's mother squeezed her daughter's hand. "It's just a bump, Emma. Stay calm." But Emma wasn't afraid. She pressed her face against the window and whispered, "The sky looks angry." Back in the cockpit, the situation worsened. The captain pulled hard on the controls, but they resisted. The plane tilted dangerously, making the passengers lean in their seats. The oxygen masks did not drop, but overhead compartments rattled. The co-pilot's voice shook now. "We're losing full control." The captain tried again, sweat forming on his forehead. His hands trembled as the plane continued to drift to one side. His eyes darted across the instruments, searching for any response, but the numbers danced wildly. In the cabin, fear spread like a silent wave. The calm atmosphere vanished. People looked around with worried eyes. Some clutched armrests. Some whispered prayers, and some hugged loved ones. The turbulence was no longer the usual kind. It felt unnatural, heavy, and endless. The flight attendants walked quickly down the aisle, checking on passengers, their polite smiles replaced by strained expressions. One attendant leaned near Emma's mother. "Please keep your seatbelt tight. Everything is under control," she said, though her own voice was unsteady. Emma watched carefully. She noticed the way the attendants exchanged nervous glances. She could feel the uneasiness in the air, even though no one explained it. Suddenly, the plane dipped lower for a moment, making everyone gasp. Luggage shifted overhead. A woman covered her child's ears. A man gripped his seat so tightly, his knuckles turned white. The captain's voice returned over the intercom, but it was different now. It no longer carried the calm confidence of before. It was heavier, slower, almost like he was carrying a burden. "Ladies and gentlemen," he paused as if gathering strength. "We are experiencing unexpected technical difficulties. Please, remain seated with your belts fastened. The crew is working to stabilize the aircraft." That was all he said. He didn't explain more. But sometimes silence tells more than words. The passengers could hear the strain in his voice, and their fear deepened. Inside the cockpit, the co-pilot shook his head. "Controls aren't answering. It's like they're frozen." The captain sat back, his hand slipping from the yoke for a moment. His shoulders slumped as he whispered something only the co-pilot could hear. "We may not regain it." Those words never reached the passengers, but somehow the feeling of hopelessness traveled through the thin walls of the cabin. Emma looked at her mother and asked softly, "Why doesn't the plane listen to him?" Her mother's face grew pale. She didn't know how to answer. Instead, she hugged Emma closer, trying to shield her from the fear all around. Minutes stretched like hours. The plane shook again, not violently, but enough to remind everyone that something was terribly wrong. The altitude stayed at 15,000 feet, but the plane drifted off its normal path. In the silence, people began whispering. "What's happening? Why isn't he telling us more? Is the plane broken?" The questions filled the air, but no one had answers. Emma's notebook slipped from her lap. She picked it up and held it tightly against her chest. She remembered her grandfather's words about machines. He always said, "Sometimes machines behave like people. They get tired when pushed too hard. You must treat them gently." She whispered those words to herself again, almost like a secret prayer. Her mother stroked her hair and said softly, "It's okay, Emma. Just stay calm. The pilots will fix it." But Emma noticed the trembling in her mother's hand. She could see the truth. Her mother was afraid. Everyone was afraid. Even the strong pilot's voice could not hide the truth anymore. The little girl looked out of the window again. The clouds floated calmly, as if nothing was wrong. They didn't know the fear inside the plane. To Emma, it felt unfair. How could the sky look so peaceful while hearts inside the cabin were so heavy? The plane gave another lurch, and passengers gasped again. The captain did not speak this time. Only silence filled the intercom, and in that silence, something changed. The feeling of trust in the pilot began to slip away. The passengers were no longer waiting for his words. They were waiting for something else, something they couldn't name. For the first time, the captain's calm mask had cracked, and with it, hope seemed to fade. Far back in the cabin, however, Emma still stared at the sky with wide eyes. Her notebook rested on her lap again, half filled with drawings. While others trembled, she whispered gently, "Don't give up, little plane. You can still fly." The words were soft, almost lost in the noise of the engines, but they carried a feeling the cabin had nearly forgotten: hope. The cabin had grown too quiet. The usual sounds of laughter, chatter, and the soft turning of book pages were gone. Now there was only the steady hum of the engines and the nervous breaths of passengers. Even the flight attendants, who were trained to stay calm, moved with stiff shoulders and pale faces. Emma's mother tried to distract her with a snack from her bag, but Emma shook her head. She wasn't hungry. Her wide eyes were still on the window, though her thoughts were far from the peaceful sky outside. Inside the cockpit, the pressure grew heavier by the second. Warning lights flashed across the panels. The co-pilot ran checks again and again, but nothing seemed to work. The captain's hands rested on the control yoke, but his strength was fading. The plane refused to obey. "We have to tell them," the co-pilot whispered, his voice tight. The captain's jaw clenched. He had been flying for years. Pilots were trained never to show fear, never to give up hope. But now, staring at the unresponsive instruments, he realized there was no choice. The passengers deserved to know the truth. With a deep breath, he pressed the intercom button. All around the cabin, speakers crackled to life. Every head lifted, every heart skipped a beat. "This is your captain speaking," his voice began. For a moment, it carried the same calm tone as before, but then it broke. "I need to be honest with you. We have lost control of the aircraft." Gasps filled the cabin like a wave. A woman covered her mouth. A man dropped his phone onto the floor. Children clutched their parents tighter. The captain continued, though his voice was heavy. "The systems are not responding. We are trying everything we can, but right now, the controls are frozen. I cannot steer the plane." The words struck like thunder. Silence followed for a heartbeat, then whispers broke out all around. What did he say? He can't steer? Does that mean... Emma turned to her mother. "Mama, does that mean we're falling?" she asked softly. Her mother swallowed hard, blinking back tears. "No, darling, we're still flying. We're still in the sky." She hugged Emma close, but her voice shook. A flight attendant tried to calm the passengers, walking down the aisle and saying, "Please remain seated. Please stay calm." But even her words felt thin and weak. People could see the truth in her trembling hands. In the cockpit, the captain released the intercom button and leaned back. His eyes closed for a moment. He had never spoken words like that before in his career. He had always been the protector of his passengers, the one who gave reassurance. But now he had admitted his defeat, and it felt like he had taken away the last light of hope. Back in the cabin, the atmosphere was heavy. Some passengers prayed quietly, their lips moving without sound. Others sat frozen, staring at the seat in front of them. A young boy clutched a toy plane so tightly it almost broke in his hands. Emma sat quietly, watching everyone. She was young, but she could feel the change. She had never seen so many adults afraid at the same time. Her mother squeezed her hand over and over, as if that would keep her safe. Emma whispered, "Why is everyone giving up?" Her mother shook her head. "They're just scared, Emma, that's all." But Emma's heart was filled with questions. She thought about her grandfather's words. "Planes are strong, but they need gentle hands. Machines get scared when people push them too hard." She remembered how he once let her sit inside an old cockpit at a museum, showing her all the levers and buttons. Of course, she hadn't understood most of it, but she had listened carefully. Now, sitting inside a real plane that was no longer listening to its captain, she felt something stir inside her. The passengers, however, didn't notice her calmness. Their fear kept growing. A businessman near the front argued with a flight attendant. "Why don't you tell us what's really happening?" he demanded. "How can a plane just stop listening?" The flight attendant whispered, "Sir, please stay calm. The pilots are doing their best." But even she didn't believe her own words anymore. The cabin trembled again, just slightly, but enough to make children cry. A woman tried to sing softly to her baby, but her voice cracked halfway. The sound of quiet sobbing filled the rows. Emma looked around at all of them. Her small heart hurt seeing so much fear. She wanted to say something, but she didn't know if anyone would listen. To the grown-ups, she was just a child. Still, she whispered to her mother, "Maybe the plane just needs a different way. Maybe. It doesn't want to be forced." Her mother tried to hush her. "Emma, please, not now." But a flight attendant nearby overheard. She turned her head, surprised at the child's calm tone. She knelt beside their row and asked gently, "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Emma clutched her notebook. "Grandpa said sometimes machines are like friends. You can't yell at them. You have to talk kindly and not fight with them. Maybe. The plane just feels tired." The attendant blinked, caught off guard by the innocence of the words. For a moment, she almost smiled, though her eyes were wet. "That's very sweet," she whispered. "Maybe you're right." The words spread quietly to a few passengers nearby, and strangely, they gave a flicker of comfort. It wasn't logic, it wasn't science, but it was hope, something they desperately needed. Up front, the captain sat with his head in his hands. He had made the announcement, but he felt empty. His responsibility was to guide everyone safely, yet now he had admitted his failure. For the first time in his career, he truly didn't know what to do. And in the middle of all that despair, the smallest voice in the plane, the voice of a little girl, had whispered something different. Not fear, not panic, but hope. It was quiet, almost invisible, yet it was there, like a tiny spark in a dark room. Emma pressed her notebook against her chest and stared out of the window. She whispered again, this time a little louder, "Don't give up, little plane. You can do it." And, though no one believed it yet, her words were the beginning of something impossible. The cabin was still heavy with silence after the captain's announcement. People were speaking in whispers, but even those whispers carried fear. The air inside felt tight, as though every breath was harder to take. Emma sat pressed against her seat, her small notebook in her lap. She looked around at the worried faces, the mothers hugging their children, the fathers gripping the armrests, the elderly couple holding hands with closed eyes. Everyone seemed lost in their fear. Her mother stroked her hair gently, trying to comfort her daughter, but Emma could feel the nervous shaking in her mother's hand. She turned her face up and asked quietly, "Mama, why doesn't the plane listen to the captain?" Her mother froze. She had no answer. She only forced a smile, even though her eyes were watery. "The pilots are trying, Emma. They will fix it." But Emma wasn't satisfied. She tilted her head, her eyes full of thought. She whispered again, "Maybe the plane doesn't want to be forced. Maybe it just needs a friend." The words were so soft, yet the flight attendant walking nearby heard them. She paused, kneeling beside their row. Her voice was shaky but curious. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Emma clutched her notebook and explained with surprising calmness. "My grandpa used to tell me about planes. He said sometimes machines act like people. If you push too hard, they don't work. You have to be gentle. You have to talk to them kindly." The attendant blinked at the little girl. For a moment, her fear softened. The child's innocence carried a strange wisdom. She gave a small smile. "That's a beautiful thought." Emma nodded. "Maybe the captain is fighting the plane. Maybe that's why it doesn't listen." The attendant didn't know what to say. She patted Emma's hand gently and stood up, moving back down the aisle. But the child's words stayed in her mind. Nearby passengers who had overheard whispered to one another. Some chuckled nervously, but not in a mocking way. It was almost a relief, a small distraction from their fear. One man murmured, "If only it were that simple." Yet deep down, the simplicity of the girl's thought planted something new. Inside them, a tiny seed of hope. Inside the cockpit, however, hope was almost gone. The captain sat with a hand over his eyes, his other hand gripping the unresponsive controls. The co-pilot worked desperately, flipping switches, adjusting levers, but nothing answered. "It's like the plane is ignoring us," the co-pilot said in frustration. The captain gave a hollow laugh, though his eyes were tired. "Ignoring us. Maybe it knows we've given up." His voice carried exhaustion, as though he was speaking only to himself. Back in the cabin, the passengers tried. to calm themselves. Some closed their eyes in prayer, others held family photos tightly. Children sniffled softly into their parents' arms. Emma's voice rose again. She had been quiet for a while, but now she turned to her mother with serious eyes. "Mama, can I talk to the captain?" Her mother's eyes widened. "Emma, no, of course not. The cockpit is only for the pilots." "But Mama," Emma insisted, her small voice filled with determination. "Maybe if I tell him what Grandpa said, he won't give up. Maybe he just needs to remember to be gentle." Her mother shook her head, glancing nervously at the passengers nearby. "This isn't a game, Emma. It's serious." "I know," Emma whispered. "That's why I want to help." Before her mother could answer, the same flight attendant returned. She had been listening. She bent down again, her eyes kind but thoughtful. "Emma, what would you say to the captain if you could?" Emma held her notebook against her chest and replied softly, "I would tell him not to be scared. I would tell him to talk to the plane like it's his friend. Maybe the plane just needs someone to believe in it." The attendant felt a lump in her throat. She had no explanation for it, but hearing such pure words from a child gave her a strange comfort. She placed a gentle hand on Emma's shoulder. "That's very brave of you." Her mother frowned with worry, but she also saw the determination in her daughter's face. Emma wasn't being silly. She truly believed her words. The attendant stood and walked quickly toward the front of the cabin. She whispered to another crew member who looked surprised but nodded. Then, after a short moment, she disappeared into the cockpit. Inside, she spoke softly to the captain. "There's a little girl in the cabin. She said something that made me think. She said maybe the plane just needs someone to be gentle with it. That maybe you shouldn't give up." The captain blinked at her, stunned. "A child said that?" "Yes," the attendant replied, her voice almost breaking. "She believes in you, even now." The captain turned his head slowly, staring at the controls. His hands had been heavy with defeat, but the thought of a child's trust made his heart stir. He had never wanted to disappoint his passengers, but to disappoint a child who still believed in him felt unbearable. He closed his eyes for a moment. "Maybe she's right. Maybe I've been fighting too hard." The co-pilot looked at him, confused, but didn't interrupt. Back in the cabin, Emma waited. She pressed her little palms together as if in prayer. Her mother stroked her hair, whispering, "It will be okay." But Emma shook her head. "It has to be." The hum of the engines continued. The plane trembled again, but only slightly. Passengers flinched, but the moment passed. Emma leaned against the window, whispering softly so only the sky could hear. "Don't be afraid, little plane. We're with you." The other passengers didn't hear her words, but somehow the cabin felt different now. The fear was still there, but under it was a fragile thread of courage, born not from logic, not from technology, but from the question of a child. And while no one knew it yet, that tiny thread would soon become the rope that pulled them back from despair. The plane floated at 15,000 feet, still trembling from time to time. The passengers sat in uneasy silence, their hearts heavy with fear. The captain had spoken the unthinkable, that he could no longer control the aircraft, and his words still echoed in their minds. Yet, somewhere deep inside the cabin, a different kind of feeling had started to take root. A child's voice had planted hope. Emma sat by her window seat, her notebook closed on her lap. She pressed her little hands together as though she were holding something precious. Her mother stayed close, brushing strands of hair away from her daughter's face. But Emma wasn't afraid. She was waiting. The cockpit door opened with a faint creak. The flight attendant, who had listened to Emma, stepped out and walked straight toward their row. Her face was pale, but her eyes were brighter than before. She knelt beside Emma. "The captain wants to meet you," she said softly. Emma's mother gasped. "What? She's only a child." But the attendant shook her head. "He wants to hear what she has to say. Please, just for a moment." Emma looked at her mother with wide, hopeful eyes. "Mama, please, let me go." Her mother hesitated, torn between fear and trust. Finally, with trembling hands, she nodded. "Stay close to the lady. Don't touch anything inside." Emma stood, clutching her notebook, and followed the attendant down the narrow aisle. Every passenger who saw them turned their heads. Some frowned in disbelief, others whispered. Little girl being taken to the cockpit at such a time seemed impossible, but somehow it felt right. When the door opened, Emma stepped inside. For the first time, she saw the heart of the airplane. The cockpit was filled with blinking lights, glowing screens, and switches. Yet, instead of looking powerful, it looked tired, like a giant bird struggling to stay in the sky. The captain sat in his chair, his uniform neat but his shoulders slumped. The co-pilot was still at his station, eyes darting across the controls, searching for answers. The captain turned, and his tired eyes softened when he saw Emma. "You must be Emma," he said gently. Emma nodded. "Yes, sir." The captain motioned her closer. "I hear you think the plane just needs a friend." Emma's cheeks grew warm, but she held her notebook tightly and nodded again. "Yes. Grandpa told me that sometimes machines don't like being forced. You have to be gentle." The captain let out a faint laugh, not mocking, but touched. He leaned closer. "Emma, I've been flying for many years. I've read hundreds of manuals, but no manual ever told me to talk to the plane like a friend. Maybe you're right. Maybe I've been fighting it too hard." The co-pilot frowned but said nothing. He knew they had run out of options. The captain looked back at Emma, his eyes shining with something new. Hope. "Would you like to sit here with me? Just for a moment. I promise I'll keep you safe." Emma's heart skipped. She looked at the tall chair with the many controls, and though it scared her a little, she nodded. "Yes, sir." The captain gently lifted her onto the seat beside his. From the large cockpit windows, the world stretched out endlessly. Clouds floated like mountains. The sky glowed soft and blue, and the horizon curved in the distance. Emma gasped in awe. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Yes," the captain said quietly, "and it's worth fighting for." Emma placed her small hand on the control yoke. It was heavy, stiff, but she didn't try to move it. She simply rested her hand there as though offering comfort. "Hello, plane," she whispered. "Don't be scared. We believe in you." For a long moment, nothing happened. The hum of the engines continued, steady but tense. The captain and co-pilot watched silently, their hearts beating fast. Then, slowly, one of the warning lights dimmed. The controls gave a slight shiver under Emma's touch. The captain's eyes widened. He tried moving the yoke gently without force. To his astonishment, it responded, just a little, but enough to show life. "It's listening," he whispered, tears welling in his eyes. Emma smiled softly. "See? It just wanted someone to be kind," the co-pilot gasped. "It shouldn't be possible. We've been trying for an hour." But the captain didn't question it. He only whispered again, this time not to the co-pilot, but to the plane itself. "All right, my friend. We're still here. Let's do this together." The aircraft gave another gentle shiver, then steadied. The trembling that had terrified the passengers grew weaker. The nose lifted slightly, returning to level flight. Back in the cabin, passengers looked at one another in confusion. "Did you feel that?" someone whispered. "It's smoother." "Yes," another replied, eyes wide. The shaking stopped. Hope began to stir among them, though no one knew why. In the cockpit, Emma sat still, her little hand resting on the yoke beside the captain's. Her face was calm, almost glowing with quiet strength. She didn't understand technology or aerodynamics. All she had was belief, but somehow, belief was enough. The captain placed his hand gently over hers. "Thank you, Emma," he whispered. "You reminded me not to give up." Emma looked up at him with innocent eyes. "We can do it together." For the first time in hours, the captain smiled. It wasn't the polite smile of a professional pilot. It was the smile of a man who had found hope again. The co-pilot shook his head in disbelief, but couldn't hide his relief. "If this works, I'll never forget it." Emma's mother, waiting outside the cockpit door, clutched her hands together, praying for her daughter's safe return. She didn't know what was happening inside, but she felt a strange calm, as though Emma was exactly where she was meant to be. Inside, the captain adjusted the controls gently, carefully. The plane answered. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. The impossible had begun to turn into the possible, and it all started because one little girl dared to believe when everyone else had given up. The cabin of the plane was filled with a strange quietness. It wasn't silence because the engines still roared outside and the air still hummed through the wings. But inside, the fear that had once wrapped around every passenger was slowly being replaced by something different. It was fragile, like a candle flame, but it was hope. In the cockpit, Emma still sat beside the captain. Her small hand rested lightly on the yoke, and her notebook lay closed on her lap. She wasn't speaking much now, only whispering from time to time, as though the plane itself was listening. "Thank you for flying with us," she said softly, almost like she was talking to a friend. The captain glanced at her, then at the controls. He still could not understand how, but every gentle word seemed to make a difference. The trembling had calmed. The plane's nose had steadied. The systems weren't perfect. Many warning lights still glowed, but the machine seemed to respond, better when treated with calmness instead of force. The co-pilot leaned closer to his instruments. "Captain, the altimeter shows we're dropping slowly. We can't hold altitude forever." The captain nodded, his expression serious. "I know. But if the plane is listening now, maybe we still have a chance to guide her down safely." He turned to Emma. "Do you think you can stay with me a little longer?" Emma nodded firmly. "Yes, sir. I'll stay." The captain felt strength in those words. He placed his hand carefully beside hers on the yoke. "All right, my friend," he whispered again. Not to Emma this time, but to the aircraft itself. "Let's see if you'll help us land." The co-pilot checked the map on the navigation display. "There's a small regional airport about 80 miles ahead. If we can guide her that far, we might make it." The captain breathed deeply. 80 miles felt like forever, but it was better than no chance at all. He pressed the intercom button and spoke calmly into the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've regained some control. It's not perfect, but the situation is improving. Please remain seated and keep calm. We are going to attempt to reach the nearest airport." Gasps of relief filled the cabin. Mothers hugged their children tighter. Elderly passengers closed their eyes in silent prayer. A man in the back whispered, "We're not done for. We still have a chance." Emma's mother held her hands together, her eyes wet with tears. Knowing her little girl was still inside the cockpit helping in some way no adult could. The flight continued, each minute stretching longer than the last. The plane dipped slightly, now and then, as though it wanted to give up. But each time, the captain would whisper encouragement, and Emma would smile at the controls. "You're strong," she would say. "You can do this." The co-pilot stared in disbelief. "It's almost like she knows what the plane needs to hear." The captain chuckled softly, though his eyes never left the sky. Sometimes the simplest wisdom comes from the youngest voices. As they drew closer to the airport, The captain could see the faint outline of the runway through the thin layer of clouds. It was like a strip of hope lying across the earth. But there was still a problem. "We're coming in too fast," the co-pilot warned. "If we can't slow down, we won't stop in time." The captain tightened his grip. The brakes, the flaps, the landing gear, all had been unreliable earlier. If they failed now, it could ruin everything. Emma noticed the worry on his face. "What's wrong?" she asked gently. The captain sighed. "We need the plane to slow down. But the controls are stiff and I don't know if the systems will listen." Emma thought for a moment, then leaned closer to the yoke. "Don't worry. Just ask nicely." The captain almost laughed, but the look in her eyes was serious, full of quiet belief. So he tried. "All right, old friend," he whispered to the plane. "We need you to slow down now. Just a little more. Please." He eased the controls, gentle as a feather. To his surprise, the flaps extended halfway. The speed dropped slightly. Emma smiled brightly. "See? It's listening." The runway grew larger in the distance. The co-pilot's voice was tight. "Altitude, dropping. Speed still high, but better. Captain, this might work." The passengers felt the change, too. They could feel the descent, but it was steadier than before. Some pressed their hands against the windows, whispering prayers. Others closed their eyes, unable to watch. Emma leaned forward, whispering again to the plane. "Almost there. You're doing so good." The captain adjusted carefully, sweat forming on his forehead. His voice was calm, but his heart pounded. "Landing gear," he said, pressing the switch. For a second, nothing happened. Then, with a heavy thud, the wheels extended. The co-pilot exhaled in relief. "Gear down! We're ready!" The runway was rushing closer now. The earth rose to meet them. The captain held his breath, hands steady but gentle on the yoke. Emma's hand was still there, too, resting softly as if she were guiding the plane with kindness alone. "Hold on," the captain whispered. "Just hold on a little longer." The passengers clutched their seats, bracing for the unknown. Emma's mother pressed her forehead against her hands, whispering her daughter's name over and over. The nose dipped slightly too far, and the captain corrected. The wings wobbled, and Emma whispered quickly, "It's okay. Don't be scared. We're here with you." The plane steadied again. The runway stretched wide before them now. Seconds felt like hours. "Here we go," the captain said, his voice quiet but full of determination. The wheels touched the ground with a heavy jolt. The plane bounced once, twice, then settled. The engines roared as the brakes engaged. The aircraft shuddered violently, fighting to slow down. "Come on, come on," the co-pilot muttered, his eyes locked on the rapidly approaching end of the runway. The captain pressed harder, whispering encouragement all the way. Emma closed her eyes, holding her hand steady on the yoke. The world outside blurred. The sound of rushing air filled every ear. Then slowly, the speed began to fall. The runway stretched longer than it looked, and the plane continued to decelerate. The passengers dared to open their eyes. They felt the motion changing. They weren't speeding. They were slowing. At last, the plane rolled to a stop only a few hundred feet from the very end of the runway. For a moment, no one moved. The world seemed frozen in disbelief. Then a cry of joy erupted from the cabin. People cheered, clapped, and wept openly. Strangers hugged one another. Tears flowed freely, not from fear, but from relief and gratitude. In the cockpit, the captain leaned back, his chest heaving. His eyes were wet. He turned to Emma, who was smiling softly as though she had always known this would happen. "You did the impossible," he whispered. Emma shook her head. "No, sir. We all did it together. The plane, too." The captain laughed softly, a laugh filled with gratitude. He looked out at the runway stretching ahead. Against all odds, they were safe. But deep inside, everyone knew The most impossible moment had been made real by the pure belief of a child. The plane sat quietly on the tarmac, its engines slowly cooling after the impossible flight. Passengers unbuckled their seatbelts, their faces pale but shining with relief. They looked around at one another, some laughing nervously, others weeping, freely. Every soul on board had survived a moment that felt far beyond human hope. Emma's mother rushed into the cockpit door and gathered her daughter in her arms. "Oh, Emma, my brave little girl!" she cried, holding her tight, tears soaking both of their cheeks. Emma hugged her back, her small arms strong and steady. "It's okay, Mama. We're safe now." The captain stood nearby, his face still, pale, but a smile of genuine wonder played across his lips. He knelt down to Emma's level, placing a hand on her tiny shoulder. "Emma, you didn't just help me. You helped everyone on this plane. You reminded me not to give up when everything seemed lost." Emma tilted her head, looking thoughtful. "I just knew the plane could do it. I just knew we had to try together." The co-pilot stepped forward and nodded, still shaking his head in disbelief. "I've flown for years, and I've never seen anything like this. A child saved us all." Outside the plane, emergency crews had gathered, but no alarms sounded. No panic filled the air. Instead, the ground staff watched quietly, sensing that something miraculous had taken place. News crews would arrive soon, but for the moment, there was silence, filled only with gratitude and relief. Passengers began to step out, hugging one another and thanking the crew. A man lifted his small child onto his shoulders, whispering, "You're lucky to be alive." An elderly woman clasped her husband's hand, tears rolling down her cheeks. A teenage girl wrote rapidly in her notebook, recording every detail she had witnessed. Emma stayed in the captain's side, her hand lightly touching the yoke. She didn't feel scared. She felt calm, proud, and strong. She had faced the unimaginable and found a way to help. The captain watched her, thinking about the lesson he had just learned. Sometimes strength doesn't come from experience, knowledge, or power. Sometimes strength comes from belief and kindness. The news crews soon arrived, cameras flashing and microphones extended. Reporters asked questions, voices rising in excitement. "Who is this young girl who helped save the plane? How did she remain calm? What did she do?" Emma's mother stepped forward, still holding her daughter. "She is my little girl," she said softly. "She believed when everyone else was afraid." Emma looked shyly at the cameras. "I just told the plane, 'Don't be afraid,'" she said. "And I stayed with the captain." The reporters blinked in surprise. The simplicity of her words, the innocence in her voice, carried more weight than any technical explanation could. In the days that followed, the story spread across the world. News outlets called her the girl who saved the plane. People marveled at her bravery and wisdom. Psychologists and pilots alike commented on the power of calmness and belief. Children everywhere sent drawings and letters inspired by a girl who had shown them that even the smallest hands could make a difference. Emma and her mother returned home, but their lives had changed forever. Schools invited her to speak, but she preferred quiet classrooms and drawing in her notebook. She didn't see herself as a hero, only as someone who had tried to be kind. Her grandfather, who had always believed in the magic of simple lessons, hugged her tightly when he heard the story. "I knew you were special," he whispered. "Not because of this story, but because you always listen, always believe, and always care." Emma smiled, thinking about the plane, the captain, and all the people who had trusted her. She knew that bravery wasn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it was just a quiet whisper of belief at the right moment. Back at the airline, the captain wrote a letter to Emma's family. He explained that he would never forget her. "You reminded me," he wrote, "that hope can come from the smallest heart and that sometimes the impossible is possible when you believe together. The airplane itself became a symbol, too. Engineers studied the logs and the instruments. They could not fully explain why the aircraft had responded the way it did. Some called it coincidence, others called it a miracle. But for Emma and those on board, it was clear. Sometimes the heart matters more than the machine. Schools and communities celebrated her quietly, but Emma never sought fame. She drew pictures of the clouds, the runway, and the cockpit, always smiling softly. To her, the adventure was over, but the lesson remained. Courage is not measured by size, age, or strength. It is measured by belief, love, and gentle courage. Years later, Emma would walk past airplanes and smile, remembering the day she had helped an entire plane and everyone inside it. People might never know the exact moment she whispered to the yoke, or how she believed when the world around her was afraid. But she knew, and that was enough. The world remembered her story, not just for the impossible flight, but for the impossible heart of a child who refused to give up, who believed in kindness, and who showed that hope can move even the largest, most unyielding things. And in that belief, everyone found courage, knowing that even in the darkest skies, a small spark can light the way.